Okay, class, in this lesson, we are going to learn to calculate discount points for a mortgage, determine the break-even time for discount points, and calculate negative points. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So the question here is buying points a wise decision? Now, buying points is a way to bring your rate down, but there's an upfront cost to doing that, right? So when we talk about points, we are talking about mortgage points. Another term for it is also discount points. And the usual cost of a point is about 1% of the loan amount. Now, there are certain factors that you need to take into consideration when purchasing discount points. One is, how long are you going to keep the loan? In other words, how long are you going to stay in the home from which the loan was used to purchase? What is the cost of lowering the interest rate as an upfront expense? And then there's also the tax deductibility of mortgage points to also take into account. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at example one. So we have a couple, Elizabeth and Nicholas. They want to buy a new home and they need to borrow $350,000 to do so. Their bank offers an opportunity for them to buy down the quoted interest rate of 4.5% by 0.125% per point purchased. Now, each point will cost 1% of the amount borrowed. And the question here is, what will be the new interest rate if 2 points are purchased, and what will be the cost to purchase 2 points? Okay, so let's go ahead and answer the first question. What will be the new interest rate if 2 points are purchased? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 points and we're going to multiply that by 0.125 because that's the percentage per point purchased. And when we multiply that, that works out to 0.25. Okay, so buying 2 points will reduce the interest rate by 0.25%. And so we'll take the original 4.5%, and then we're going to subtract 0.25%. Okay, and that works out to 4.25%. Oops, wrong symbol. Okay, 4.25%. So essentially buying 2 points will lower the interest rate from 4.5% to 4.25%. And then the next question is, what will be the cost to purchase 2 points? Well, we know that each percent or each point purchased will cost 1% of the amount borrowed. Okay, it says it right here. Okay, so then what we're going to do is we're going to take 2% and we're going to multiply that by $350,000, and the cost of that works out to $7,000. Okay, so we've got 4.25%, and that'll cost $7,000 to bring the rate down by 0.25%. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at example 2. So continuing on with example 1, the question here is, how can the couple, Elizabeth and Nicholas, determine whether or not the purchase of those points makes sense if they plan to pay off the loan in 15 years? Okay, now here's the solution. The key in this example is to find what's called the break-even point, or the time it will take to recover the cost of purchasing those points. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is find out or calculate what the monthly mortgage payment would be without purchasing those points. Okay, now going back to example 1, remember that the loan amount is $350,000, and without buying it down, the rate is 4.5%, and they're going to want to do this in 15 years. Okay, in 15 years. So let's go ahead to the spreadsheet and let's go ahead and just crunch those numbers. We're going to use the payment function and enter in the interest rate of 4.5%. And we're going to divide that by 12 because we want to know what that monthly is. And they are going to hold on to this loan for 15 years. So that's equivalent of 180 months. And the loan amount is $350,000. Okay, and that payment is $2,677.48. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing again, except we're going to change the percentage, and that percentage, because of the discount points, the rate now becomes 4.25%. And so that amount, monthly mortgage, is now $2,632.97. Okay, so now we want to know what that difference is, or what that savings is. So we're going to take the first amount and we're going to subtract the second amount, and we're going to see that the rate buy down saves them $44.50 per month. Okay, now we know that the cost to purchase those 2 points is $7,000. And we're going to divide that by the savings amount that we calculated, and that was $44.51. $44.51. And punching that into the calculator, we find that is 157.27. Okay, so essentially it'll take about 157 months to break even. 157 months. And since Nicholas and Elizabeth plan on staying in the home for 15 years, then this does make sense to buy those discount points, because after month 157, that's when their savings kicks in. All right, so let's go ahead to example 3. So continuing on, the question here is, how much will Elizabeth and Nicholas save over the life of their loan from the purchase of the 2 points? Well, we know from example 2, from the previous example, that it was going to take 157 months to break even. So the question is, how many months are left? Well, 180 months, which is the total term of the loan, and we subtract 157 months, which is our breaking even point, and that gives us 23 months. Okay, and so we're going to take 23 months and we're going to multiply that by the monthly savings that we calculated earlier, which is $44.51, and that works out to $1,023.73. Okay, so they would save just over $1,000 over the life of the loan by purchasing 2 points. All right, so let's go ahead on to example 4, but before we do, we need to understand the concept of negative discount points. Okay, so what are negative discount points? So some lenders will offer borrowers, so let's say you go to a lender and you are looking to borrow or get a loan to buy a home. Some lenders will offer a way to decrease the closing costs through what's called the purchase of negative points. These are the reverse of the discount points. In other words, rather than purchasing a deduction in your mortgage rate, instead of lowering your mortgage rate, the borrower credits you an amount toward the closing costs. So essentially they could cover all of the closing costs in exchange for increasing your mortgage rate by a fraction of a percentage. Okay, so a lot of times when you're home out shopping for a home, you will see lenders offering zero closing cost option. What the lender is doing is they're offering you, the borrower, the opportunity not to pay any of the bank's closing costs. They're going to essentially, quote unquote, cover the closing cost, but in exchange, they're going to increase the mortgage rate. Okay, so let's see how this works. So in this example, let's suppose that Elizabeth and Nicholas had received an estimate of their closing costs in the amount of $10,500. Okay, so that's how much they're going to need to come to the table to close. And this excludes prepaid interest and homeowners insurance. Now, their lender offers them the option of reducing that cost by raising their mortgage interest rate according to the following plan. Okay, so at an APR of 4.5%, which is the current interest rate offer, that is 0 negative point. So the monthly payment, as we know, and as we had calculated, is $2,677.48. So the credit towards closing costs is $0. Okay, and as we increase our APR by 1/8 of a percent, that's 0.125. Okay, that's 1 negative point. You see how the monthly payment goes down and the credit towards closing costs increases. Okay, so if we go all the way up to 4.875, that's 3/8 of a percent. That's the equivalent of 3 negative points. Your monthly payment goes up to $2,745.04, and credit towards closing costs is $10,500. Okay, so the question here is, how can they, Elizabeth and Nicholas, determine if it is worth taking the 4.875% APR in exchange for 0 closing costs? Okay, so the first thing to do is to determine the difference in monthly payments between the 4.875% and the 4.5%. Okay, so at 4.875%, they're going to be paying, oops, my apologies, $2,745.04. Okay, so that's assuming that they have all of their closing costs covered. Now, if they don't do that, then their monthly mortgage amount would be $2,677.48. So the difference between those two numbers is $67.56. Okay, so now we're going to take this number and divide that into the 10,500. Okay, so this will tell us how many months it will take to break even. Okay, and if you punch this into the calculator, we'd find that it would take about 155.4 months. So it'll take that long to basically pay off the original closing costs. But if they are planning to remain in the house with the same mortgage, they're going to continue paying an extra $67.56 per month because they opted for the negative points. And since they're planning on staying for the duration of the loan, the purchase of the negative points is not a good idea because it's going to end up costing them more money. Okay, hopefully that made sense. If any of this was unclear, please go back to the beginning of the recording and listen to this again. Thank you.